This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Raised by a demonically possessed mother. That's this week on A View from the Bunker. Who would have thought just a few years ago we'd find ourselves in a world where refusing an experimental medicine could keep you from traveling, going to the store, or even cost you your job? Actually, we did. My novel, The God Conspiracy, was published last year when it suddenly became much more relevant than it had been when I started writing it more than 15 years ago. And I drew on characters and ideas developed by Sharon a few years earlier for her novel, The Armageddon Strain. We'd like to make The God Conspiracy available to you as part of our special offer during the month of August. It's a fast-moving story of people, ordinary people, who find themselves in circumstances beyond their control, and the only ones who really understand what's going on are those who see that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. During the month of August, we'll send you The God Conspiracy and 12 hours of video teachings. Our 2 DVD sets, Unmasking the Ancient Gods and This Is War. 4 discs in all, 12 hours of video teachings. A retail value altogether of $120 for just $35 plus shipping and handling. This offer is only available during the month of August and only at our store. Available online at gilberthouse.org. Stories of demonic possession are frightening enough when it's about an adult who is possessed and suddenly no longer in control of one's own life. But consider the perspective of a child, a young child, raised in a home by a mother, essentially on her own, who's demonically possessed. How would that shape you? Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining us this week is a gentleman who's, that's his life story. And now in his mid-50s, he still deals with the stress from being raised by a mother who was demonically possessed. But he's accepted Jesus Christ, and now he's telling his story, hoping that this will be a help to others who are enduring demonic oppression and possession. He's authored two books about his life journey, Devil Take the Hindmost, Parts 1 and Part 2. And we welcome to the program for the first time, Michael Gagliardi. Michael, I've only had the opportunity to just dig into your book a little bit, just reading the introductory chapter, and it's clearly a lot to tell, and we're not going to get to all of it clearly in the course of this one program. But and I'll be honest, 25 years ago when I just started down this journey, I probably would have looked at your story and said, yeah, okay, here's somebody who's just trying to get attention. I was raised in very liturgical denominations where, forget about demons, we didn't even talk about the Holy Spirit. I mean, that was just not a thing. So, but since then, I've had the opportunity to meet and talk with people like, our mutual friend Ellie Marzulli, but, Tom Horn, the late Russ Dizdar, others who are in deliverance ministry, and even some renowned Bible scholars who acknowledge the existence of satanic ritual abuse and the entities that are behind it for me to discount this anymore. So when you reached out and pointed me to your book, I thought, okay, well, this is an opportunity to hopefully show some folks that they're not alone. Sharon went through some very public abuse on the internet, social media, after sharing some accounts of demonic oppression, not possession, but oppression. If that's the typical response of people in your world when you try to share a story like this, it's easy to understand why people are not willing to talk publicly about things like this. This is a terrifying enough story when it happens to an adult, but when you're a child who's the child of an adult who's being possessed like this, how did you cope for 12 years?
Well, I'm still coping to this day. It has had such an impact on my life because it started around when I was 3 and it kind of ended when I was 18. And, now that I look back over it, I have severe PTSD symptoms to this day. Every night when I go to sleep, my face goes numb. I can't feel my lips. My hands go numb. I have to take a medication that puts me to sleep, because if I don't, the anxiety and trauma becomes so increased that I end up passing out. I mean, I've had so many trips to the hospital, so many ambulances coming over, and they just say, yeah, it's stress. It's stress. Well, I know that it's PTSD, but it's severe PTSD. And, it really didn't hit me until I was in my 20s, and it's kind of funny, because as I get older, it's morphed from depression, clinical depression, into now in my 50s. I'm 54 right now. It's morphed into, like I say, I have the nighttime. My face goes numb. I wake up with a numb face, and numb lips. Sometimes so bad I can't even talk right. It takes a while for it to go away, and it's always at night. And when I wake up in the morning, I have to deal with these symptoms too. I mean, I can't be in a crowd. I hate loud noises. I mean, all of the things that you would suspect, like a POW to go through, or a survivor of a, soldier, that went to Vietnam or anything like that. And in fact, I had psychologists that were telling me you need to speak with people that counsel POWs and soldiers with severe PTSD. And they had no answer for me. And the only thing I ever found was Christ. I mean, that's basically how I came to Christ, because I was in lockdown for suicidal tendencies. I wanted to end my life, because that's what I began to figure out, what had happened to me. And as a child, it was really weird, because you'd think that, your question was, how did I cope with it as a child? But I don't really know how I coped with it. I was an overachiever. I mean, I got A's in everything, A pluses and everything, was the captain of every team. I was a classic overachiever, and I had no parents to show my report cards to. And I spent as much time outside. I mean, nature and fishing and being outside was my main source of therapy. And when I came home, I dealt with the situations, but, children have a way of coping with things that their mechanisms are incredible. They have a will to survive. And I was able to shut it off, I guess. I'm really not, God didn't allow me to really see really what was going on. It was a sense of protection there. Kind of a veil in front of a veil in front of a veil, so to speak, as we know in the spiritual realm. But, when I became an adult, that's kind of when it all started to fall apart and dissipate. And I know that the Lord wanted me to deal with this, because, God uses everything for his good, no matter how wicked what the enemy, wants to use for evil. God's going to use it for good. And even in my 20s, and I didn't even know who Christ was, I would point my finger to the heavens and say, I'm not going to be your poster boy for any of this. But, as I got older and older, God kind of tightened the constraints around me,
Well, let's lay the foundation for people who don't
Sure.
know your backstory. You say this began when you were about 3 years old. So
Yes.
you probably, you don't remember a time before when your mother was not under this sort of demonic control. What was it? What was a typical day like? I mean, I guess how do we know that your mother was demonically possessed and not just psychologically disturbed?
Yeah, well, it went in stages, and I have an older sibling who's 7 years older than me, and she kind of backfilled me on some of the information while I was, before I was born, and the story unfolds from my view is that when I was 3 years old, the first evidence that happened to me, which traumatized me, was that, I'm an Italian kid, and, we have this lunch special as children called pasta fagioli, it's like star soup for American children, with a little dollop of ricotta in it. And usually my mother would call me to the table, and it would already be there. I would come sit at the table and eat my star soup and go back and watch Sesame Street. But one afternoon, she called me to the table. I sat down in my chair, and she came up behind me and she poured all the hot scalding soup down my shoulder, all down my shoulder, emptied the whole thing on my shoulder. I was screaming bloody murder. She was unaffected by what I was going through. She casually picked up the phone, made a call, the taxi came, we got in the car, we went to the doctors. She never said a word to me, she never comforted me. We went to the doctors, they treated me. I remember getting bandages all on my shoulder. Never said a word to me, never kissed me, and we went home. And from then on, I was looking at her with kind of an odd eye. Even at 3 years old, I was an extremely analytical child, and this heightened that sense. So I began to stay away from her. I mean, I was afraid of her at that point. At 3 years old, I was afraid of her. We had moved into another house about 3-4 months later. We were in an apartment at the time. And, when you're a child, adults don't think that you can understand or comprehend or, when they're talking, when adults talk. And I remember being in my room, with the door cracked open, going to sleep. And I remember my mother and her sister talking about seances and, these kind of things. This was the early 70s. I'm 54, so this was probably 1973. And previously, and this is where my sister filled in the gap, before I was born, my grandfather, who she adored, or her father, who was my grandfather, she adored, he died in a horrible train accident across the train tracks. I guess he was drunk, got his legs cut off and died. And she loved him tremendously. And we suppose, and this is with my sister, backfilling some of the information, we'd suppose that her and her sister, who was very occultish, was very much into the occult, that they tried to do a seance, because that was the thing back then in the early 70s, around the table doing that kind of thing, that she had tried to acquire her father because she missed him and adored him so much. And this is where we kind of pinpoint the entry point, because she was devastated. She couldn't survive. She was completely annihilated mentally and spiritually by the loss of her father. So it made sense in that secular world to try and contact, a loved one, her loved one. So this is where it all began. And we kind of pinpointed that, around that time. So anyway, as a child, I was hearing these things, and while I was 4 years old, my mother began, this was after the soup thing, maybe 6 months, we moved into another house in Toronto. So we're talking Toronto here, Canada. She began to say odd things, that she was seeing small people running around the house. She was seeing the cat was eating these small people because she saw the legs dangling out of their mouth. She was beginning to hear voices. She was beginning to hear knocking, in the house, scratching, these kind of things, voices telling her to do wicked things. And this went on for some time. My father, everybody asks me this, so I'll just get to it. Where was my dad during all this? Well, my dad was in the mafia at the time. He was a womanizer. He was never home. He was a refugee in World War II, so he's had his own PTSD issues. He didn't speak English very well. So he was pretty much not part of the whole deal. He was never home. We never related. We probably spoke 20 words in the first 18 years of my life. Just either because he wasn't there or we just didn't click, So these things began to increase. We moved from there. Something happened in our family life. And we ended up moving 120 miles away to this isolated little town in Georgian Bay in Canada. But my dad still drove 120 miles back to where we just moved from to go to work. So some dynamic in the family happened, and I believe, and I'm going to speculate on this, that this was there was some sort of swinging or something going on, because I was at a small age subject to very sexual activity. I think maybe that could have been abused, and I remember certain things that were not right as a small child. You just can't pinpoint them. You're really not sure how they. But I was over sexualized at a very young age. And so when we moved up to this small town, this is where things began to increase. By the time I was 5 years old, which was kindergarten when we moved up there, my mother began to disconnect from us. She began to talk to herself frequently, not answering our questions. If you would engage with her, she wasn't there. This seemed to be, we all took it as some sort of mental illness, and, kind of said, she's crazy. My dad was never there. And when he did talk to her, he just, wanted nothing to do with it. He had a girlfriend on the side, but every year it began to increase. And then by the time I was 12, it began to get violent. She began to, she was never known as a swearing and cursing woman. She was very quiet when I was younger, very quiet. But now she became very verbal, a lot of blasphemies, a lot of swearing, a lot of, sacrilegious type of talk out of nowhere, just sitting in her chair, cursed be, Jesus, and stuff like this. And at that point, I was in school one day, and some men came to the door in my classroom. They opened up the door. They called my teacher over. They talked. There was a policeman there, and they called me over. And I had to go. My neighbor was standing there, and his name was Jerry. And he said, come with me. And we went in his car, and he said, Michael, there's been an accident. And I said, what's happened? She said, well, your mother tried to kill your sister. So I get home, and then I get the story from my mother, because there were witnesses outside. Apparently, she had run at her from the kitchen with a big, huge butcher knife. And she was told by these voices to kill her because she was a witch. But that morning, I had left the doors open because it was a nice day near the end of the school year. And in Canada, everybody leaves their doors open. If it's 60 degrees, that's like summer weather. So I happened to leave all the doors open because you have a mud room. So you got all these doors you have to go through. And my sister said, if you hadn't left all those doors open, she was right behind me, and she would have killed me. So she was chasing her around the car, and all the neighbors came out and called the police. Anyway, subsequently, they came. They took her in a straitjacket and took her to a mental institution that was nearby, about half an hour away. So we're like, okay, it wasn't uncharacteristic to see this kind of activity because she was doing really crazy things at that time. And then they told us, social services told us, she'll be back in 3 months. So she attempts murder, and it's being witnessed by my neighbors, and they said she'll be back. So 3 months later, she returns to the house. My sister now, who is 18 years old, says, I'm out of here. And prior to all of this, even though my sister lived with us, I never saw her because she lived in her room with a big padlock on the door. She'd come out, get food, go back in, lock the door. Because my mother would come and rattle our doors at nighttime and try to get into our room. And this had already started years previous, maybe when I was 7 years old, 8 years old. So I grew up with my dresser, which was, I think, 4 or 5 dressers. I filled them all with bricks and pushed them against the door every night, and then slept with a hockey stick in the same fetal position every night for like 8 years till I left holes in my mattress where my knee, where the points of pressure were, my knee, my hip, my elbow, and my ankle. So this is how I grew up. And at that time, my sister said, I've had enough. I'm going to live with my grandmother. I'm 18 years old. I can leave. So she leaves. So now there's just me. My father's working Monday through, Friday or Saturday. He comes up on the weekend for a couple of hours, takes care of business, and goes back down again. So there's just me and my mother here. And after that incident, it escalated that now she was beginning to sit in a chair from dusk till dawn, from dawn to dusk. Or no, the other way around. She would go there in the morning, and then when the sun was going down, she'd be sitting in this chair. Now she began to speak to herself all day in different languages and having conversations in different voices. And this started gradual. It went from one voice to two voices to three voices to so many voices that I couldn't keep up, and I couldn't understand anything because they were foreign languages. Every once in a while, I'd hear a word that resembled English, but once again, at this point, I've grown up in it like a frog in water, so it's not startling to me, but I was beginning to break down as a child. So this went on for a few more years, and she began having these conversations, and then they became very violent, where she was arguing, and and then switching to another voice, and switching to another voice, and another, and this went on all day long, from the early morning hours when the sun went up to sunset. And she began hitting herself in the chest with a log, whacking herself in the chest with a log all day long for 9 hours, never stopping, and then drop deading. She would lift her leg up and then drop dead it. And this would go on, this constant beating. And I was beginning, as I was becoming more aware, I think I was like 15 or 16 years old, it was starting to have an impact on me. I was starting to fail at school, and I couldn't stand it. Some days I would go out and just sleep in the park because I didn't want to come home. Because at nighttime, when the sun went down, a whole different scenario took place in my house. She would go into her room right at sundown every night, like clockwork. And then all of a sudden I would hear all this banging, like three people wrestling. And, in Canada, we have a basement, so you have a subfloor. So, you pound on the subfloor, you can hear it all through the house. We didn't have a very big house. It was maybe 1,100 square feet. So you could hear this, and I'm hearing all this banging. And, her bedroom is just down the hallway, so it takes me like 10 steps to get there from the living room. So I would run in there, open up the door, whip open the door, and she would be lying there with the covers pulled up to her eyes, and her eyes like saucers. And I'd be going, what's going on? What's going on in here? And she would say, Satan's jumping from the ceiling onto my chest. And I would just discount it and, walk out. But here's the interesting thing, that by this time, my mom, who was 4'11", was close to 250 pounds. I don't know, as a kid, she was ravenously eating everything in sight, to the point where my dad had to put all of the food in a, one of those large, we had back in the 70s, a large freezer that you had in the basement, that could fit a body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he had put a big chain on it. And she would ravenously going around the house, eating everything. There was no femininity left in her at all. She was like a ravenous animal, eating everything in sight. So I was starving as a kid. And this went on for probably four years before the end. So I began stealing lunches at church, I never went to church, at school. I started stealing lunches at school and going over to a friend's house and, eating apples off the trees. And, because we lived in the Niagara Fruit Belt area, so there was fruit everywhere in the summer. But in the wintertime, I had to steal food. So anyway, this got so bad, her doing these voices and swearing, and that I would go away for a few days, invite myself over to a friend's house to stay the night, just out of sake of sheer fear at this point. Because now that I was in high school, I think I was maybe in 9th grade, 10th grade, I was starting to shake and starting to feel the effects of this. And I thought, I've got to do something. It's either her or me. And I was beginning to feel like that there has to be some sort of confrontation to end this. She's going to kill me or I'm going to kill her or something like this. And this is how I was thinking. I was trying to process this. And I would come home after 3 days and park my bike outside, and all the windows would be open, and I would park my bike outside, and I could hear the thumping from inside the house. She never stopped. This never stopped. And the screaming at nighttime, she'd scream bloody murder all night long. During the day, she'd go over to the neighbor's house, every neighbor on the street. She'd knock on their doors. They'd answer the door, and then in a raspy man's voice, she'd go, "I don't accept you. I'm going to cut your head off." And these are the things she would say. And of course, the cops would come over, and they did this constantly. And nothing ever came of it about the one time she went to the mental institution. So one day this came to a head. I think I was maybe 17 at the time, and I was coming home from a bike ride because I was going out for bike rides for the therapy because I was having so much anxiety, and I had insomnia because of her trying to get into my room every night. So I had insomnia. So one afternoon, I parked my bike outside. And I went down into the basement. You go down this, there's two ways into the basement, one from the inside of the house and one from the outside of the house. So I come downstairs and I see my mother there. Now, remember this, let me give you a picture of her at this very point. She's 4'11". She weighs probably 250 pounds. That's my estimation at, 17 years old, whatever, however. But she was obese. She was obese. Her hair was all outgrown and in her eyes. All of her teeth were broken. Her molars, every tooth she had in her mouth was broken. She never complained about it, but I would walk across the room and she would wave her tongue at me and go, like this. And her side of her tongue was all like ripped open and then healed and ripped open. And it was all serrated like a knife because all her teeth were broken. She was biting her tongue or something. I don't know. So her hair's all in her face. And the only thing I could say when I saw her, she had a hacksaw and she was trying to hacksaw the chain off. And I just yelled out, "Hey!" She flips her head around this and looks at me and snarls at me like an animal. Her hair's all in her face and she has this raspy man's voice. Scared the daylights out of me. Her eyes are just black balls. And she goes, like this at me. And I just looked at her and I was freaked out. She threw down the hacksaw and ran upstairs. Now, at this time, I'm 6 feet tall and I weigh like 126 pounds because I have anorexia bulimia. This is one of the ways I'm dealing with the stress, and I'm super thin, but I'm lightweight and she beat me up the stairs. This 4'11", 250-pound woman beat me up the stairs because I chased her up the stairs. Because at that point I was shaking. See, I'm shaking right now just telling the story, which I do every time because it's a trigger. I chase her up the stairs because this is it. I can't take this anymore, And she beats me to her room. She slams the door, and I'm right there, right after she slams the door. And then I see the door bow outward, and it's bowed like this. She's pressing herself against the door and holding the handle. And I try to open the door and I can't open the handle. I'm a virile 17-year-old kid and I can't open the door. She's holding it with such power. I can't even budge it. And I can hear her snarling and growling behind the door. And I'm right at that time, I'm shaking and I'm like, but I'm so drawn to this. I can't explain to you what the feeling was, but I was drawn to it. I wanted this over. I wanted this conflict over, and so I'm just standing there waiting, and I wait for maybe, I don't know, it seemed a lifetime, but maybe 5 minutes, and I see the bow of the door go out, and I saw the handle relax. So I kind of wring my hands together, like in a cartoon before you do something, and I'm about to open the door. And I grab the door and I open it up really quick. And she's standing there. Her eyes are just black holes. And we meet. I'm 2.5 feet away from her. And the left side of her head has got a big bulge in it about this big. And it's bulging from this side to her temple. So her face is disformed. I forget what the word is. It's like some sort of
Deforming.
It's deforming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dysmorphia. She's having dysmorphia over her left eyebrow into her temple. And I'm talking the size of a golf ball. It's bulged out to here and then it bulges over to the side. Much like how you would squeeze a balloon and one side bulges out and the other side is, left flat. It was exactly like that. And she's looking at me and she's snarling at me and she lunges at me. And I take off down the hall. I run outside. I ran outside, go down the driveway, and then all I hear is slam from her bedroom door. And we've got a huge pane of window pane in our front. And this thing goes back and forth like this. Boom, 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 boom. And I can hear, because the vacuum, there's a vacuum impulse, from closing the door. And the whole house is shaking. I can hear, I'm on the driveway, and I can hear all the windows clapping back and forth. So I'm standing on the driveway, and I've got my hands on my knees, and I'm going, and I'm trying to say a word. And I'm trying to gather myself because I just don't believe what I just saw. And I'm trying to gather myself because I'm in a state of frantic panic. And I cannot say a word. I can't say a word. And I'm trying so hard to vocalize something and it won't come out. So I thought to myself, oh, my dad's in town, because it happened to be a Saturday afternoon. And that was the one short window my dad was in town. So luckily, our phone happened to be right inside the door, outside the mudroom in the living room, right close to the door there. So I open the door carefully and I bring the phone out, and it has a long cord on it. And I'm trying to, of course, it's a dial phone because this is, the early 80s. And I'm trying to dial the phone and I can't get my finger in the hole to dial the phone because I know where he is. He's at his girlfriend's house and I know who his girlfriend is and I know her phone number. So I'm trying to put my finger in the dial. It takes me like 20 minutes to dial the phone number because I can't get my finger in the hole. And once I do, I'd get 5 numbers and then a number wrong or not enough all the way around. It was so frustrating. So finally it happens and she answers the phone and I'm like, and she recognizes my voice and I hear her screaming, Emmanuel, which is my dad's name, Emanuele, in the Italian, Emmanuel. Mm-hmm. And he comes to the phone. He goes, what's going on? What's going on? And I can't say anything. I'm still shuddering. And he says, okay, I'm coming over. So I hang up the phone and within a minute, because he's a minute away, he comes into the driveway and he goes, what's going on? What's going on? I'm just like, I'm trying to say mom, but I can't say anything. So anyway, he begins to walk into the house and I'm right behind him. And he opens that door to the mudroom, the same door where the telephone was, but now it's outside. He opens the door and there she is standing there with the same face. She grabs him. My dad's 5'8". Back then he was 5'8", probably 170 pounds. She grabs him and throws him down and begins scratching and gnarling at his face while she's in this voice. And I'm freaking out. My dad's freaking out. He's being pummeled. He's got scratches all over his face and his chest. He manages to break free after a minute or two, and he runs outside. And now he's shuddering in the driveway going, because he knows that's not the wife that he married years ago. This shook him so greatly. I'd never seen my dad get angry or I saw him get angry, but I never seen him cry or have any sort of emotions other than being a tough Italian kid. I'd never seen any emotion. He was in the driveway shuddering, almost in tears. And I still couldn't talk. So the phone's outside. He grabs the phone. He calls the police. The police immediately call the mental institution. And they all show up. My mother's window, they go in the house. My mother's window is right there at the driveway, so I can hear them talking. And this is like every other time that the police came to my house. They're interviewing her and they're saying, well, Mrs. Gagliardi, what is going on here today? And I heard her normal voice for the first time in my life. She's like, I don't know, officer. I don't know what the situation is. I really don't understand why you guys are here and what's going on. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I'm hearing my mother's normal voice for the first time because I've never heard it. And they end up taking her. They put her in a straitjacket They take her in an ambulance, and she's off to a mental institution again. And 3 months later, they say she's coming back. And I'm done. At this point, when I heard that, I was ready to do a bomb scare at my high school. I was losing my mind, and I didn't know what to do. So at that point, I started making plans to come to California, and I was going to just come to California, on a Greyhound bus and be homeless in California because I didn't know what to do. And you can't be homeless in Canada because you'll freeze to death.
Yeah.
So that was my plan. And my dad was in the process of selling the house, and he ended up selling the house and then got her an apartment so that she didn't have to come home. And she got an apartment like above the main drag in a town that was about 30 minutes away. And he said, "Do you want to go see your mother?" Now I'm fast forwarding a little bit, just before I'm ready to leave to California. And that's the second part of my story. And so I say, okay, well, I'll go see her. So he drives me there. He says it's the first door on the right. So I go up this long stairway, up to the apartment. I knock on the door. She opens the door, doesn't even look at me, as if she knew I was coming. I walk in. I follow her. She walks over to her bedroom. I've never been in this apartment before. This was the first and only time I ever was in there. She sits on the bed, reaches over to a nightstand, grabs a letter, gives me a letter, and then lays back down on her bed. And then all of a sudden, she starts going and I'm like, I'm done. I've had it. I immediately walk out of there, go downstairs, get in my dad's truck. And I think it was the 2 days after or 3 days after I got on a plane and was headed to California, and I was done. So the interesting story is, and I'll just end with this, is that when I got to California, 12 days later, they called me because I left my number with I have family members in Upland, but I was living in Glendale. I had met somebody and I was with them, and they had called me and they said, "We have bad news for you." And I said, "What's that?" They said, "Well, your mother passed away." And I said, "She passed away?" And they said, "Yeah, she died of a heart attack." Well, she was eating herself to death. And I said, "Well, what day did that happen on?" And they said, "Well, it took 7 or 8 days before they found her because she was decomposing. And the other tenants smelled it. So they went and knocked on her door, broke down the door, and found her." They said the coroner said she died on this day. That was the day that I left for California. And it's like, it's all done. It's like the demons finished what they had to do. Because I'll tell you, Derek, now that I've become a Christian, I know for sure, because I've studied it now for the last 30 years, that I was the target. I was the target. Quite often, God tells Satan his plans. I'm going to take the Jews over here. You got 400 years. He's going to populate the land with Nephilim and Rephaim. And he often tells them the plans. Job is a great example of that, And he knew that I was going to be a Christian because none of my family is Christian. No one. But the woman that I met in California, I was the first one in the family to be a Christian. And from her, my wife became a Christian, her mother, her sister, her husband, boom, 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 all these people. I was the spiritual catalyst as God used it for the whole family. So, and once I got into my 30s, my 20s and early 30s, I began to research what is wrong with me. And then I started to recall everything. And then I began to study every demonic exorcism transcript, everything that's legit, because you got to weed out, 98% of them to get to the truth. And then I realized all of the characteristics she had, everything I saw, everything she said. I mean, she spoke in all these languages, and it is no wonder to this day I taught myself 6 languages because I wanted to know what she was saying, and I couldn't. When you're a child, you hear your mother tongue. And that's how you learn your mother tongue. When I was growing up, I heard many mother tongues. And that's what made me want to learn language. And I picked up on languages, 6 different languages, just like that, because I was so used to hearing that. It's like, oh my gosh, I've heard that before. And then I realized, now I know where I heard it from. And the most interesting insight I have with growing up like this in this horrible situation is that I understand now demonic speech. I understand there's a vernacular, there's, I'm not going to say dialect because there's no dialect, but they speak in terms of their characteristics and their identity. Because when they fell from heaven, or the demons, who are the Nephilim spirits, God has removed from them everything that is him. That's why they're an Antichrist spirit, because they're the polar opposite of him. So their only characteristic, they hate, their speech is always hate, it's scatological, and you can hear their chaos. I can hear their nuances, their vernacular, and their gait. I'm so familiar. So that's why I can listen to and look at transcripts of demonicism, and I said, that's mental illness. I can hear their gait. If you've ever listened to the Annalise Michel tapes, the demonic exorcism in there, they said the same things my mother said. I could hear it even in German. I heard the exact same statements, because their characteristics and their identity as demons and fallen angels, God has extracted from them everything that was from him. They now are the Antichrist, the antithesis of Christ and of Jesus. And they speak in these manners that gives them away. It's their identity. They blaspheme, of course, but they speak. I've become so in tune to it. I can tell the gait of their speech, just like somebody has a gait when they walk. And detectives are able to, oh yeah, they're a little heavy on one side, maybe, a pelvic region is tipped to the left, I can hear it. I can hear it instantly. And it doesn't matter what language it's in. I can hear it. And I can hear that it's fake. And I can tell when they lie. That's how accustomed I was, because I had 12 years of hearing their speech. So it's fascinating. And I have yet to see scholars get into, we talk a lot, which is great. We talk a lot about the Nephilim, everything that they've done in the world and how it's been hidden, and, how much better we can understand the Bible because of what they did, their incursions. But I think we haven't had some interesting conversations about what they really say. What comes from their mouth, and, I'm no expert, but I can tell you, I probably have, after all my research, the most intense experience background of their speech patterns of anyone that I've ever read. And I've done every research since the 13th century on every exorcism case that I can get a hold of. And, it's always par for the course with the Catholics, that have that dominion, which is kind of like the boss telling the employees what to do, but I can tell that too. I listen to all those transcripts and I can see the lies, I can hear the thespians. Thespian, you and I know that thespian, the word in the Greek, means inspired by the gods.
Yes.
It's acting.
Right.
It's acting, they put on this, Christ. It's all for fear. It's all for naught, but really in actuality, they're humiliated by the spirit of Jesus Christ, and the power of Jesus Christ. They flee, and we know that. The Catholic Church has kind of had the stranglehold on, that the bishop has to, say whether an exorcism can be. No, we all have that power, because if he who lives in us is greater than he who is in the world. And these are the things that the most interesting aspects of my experience that I've learned is pretty much the speech detail, which we know that the people that were in my mother were Nephilim spirits, and demons, or demon, means disembodied spirit.
Right.
Well, to be disembodied, you had to have a
body originally.
body.
Right.
So I'm sure you have questions.
Well, yes, and I know we're only going to scratch the surface here, because again, in trying to keep these programs to a manageable length, we'll see maybe another 10 minutes or so. But I guess the biggest question is, what was it that got you out of this? I mean, after this sort of trauma for so many years, your formative years, What was it
Yeah.
that led you to Jesus Christ?
Well, the thing was, I became seriously depressed because, after you're removed from the situation, and, PTSD symptoms are like this. When you're removed from the situations and everything's calm, that's when the body says it's okay to freak out now.
Yeah.
This is where the body releases all the issues. And my issues began to rise and rise until I was so depressed that I was going to kill myself. And I was attempting suicide. And I got in lockdown at Yorba Linda in Southern California. And from there, my wife and I separated. I was having such a hard time coping. I didn't even know what I was or who I was. I knew that there's something wrong with me mentally, and I never connected the two because I had no spiritual understanding, and my wife and I separated for 6 months. And during that time, she found out, about 3 months into it, that she was pregnant with our first daughter. That leveled such a heavy guilt on me that the moment she told me that, I was on my Walkman the very next day listening to Dr. James Dobson because I heard a program about fathers and daughters. And I'm like, oh my God. And this spirit began to pressure me that I've made a mess of my life. What do I do? I mean, it's the classic, you get put in a corner and you choose this day where, whom you will serve.
Right.
So it came to a climax. I was going to see my wife. I'm going to see her because I felt so guilty about the situation, and I didn't want our daughter to grow up without a father and a mother. And I was it was the heaviest weight I ever bore in my life. So I'm on Ventura Boulevard, and I'm going down past Taft High School, and I begin to cry. And I said to myself, because I never knew who Jesus was, and I said, God, whoever you are, I've made a mess of my life. Forgive me of the sin that I've created. I'm creating a mess here. And please come to me. Please forgive me for what I've done. And please. And I cried in front of a bus of about 40 or 50 people. And they were all looking at me like I was on, crack or something. And I didn't care because my life is falling apart. After I had said that prayer, once again, no knowledge of sinner's prayer or coming to Jesus or anything like that, because God knew I never trusted no man. It was him and me. It had to be him and me, or it wasn't going to happen. Soon as I finished that prayer, all of a sudden the scales and the veil pulled away from my eyes, and I was looking around and seeing the world as falling down. At 19 years old, 20 years old, the world is an amazing place, and you're just discovering it. But I saw it the opposite. And by the time I got down to Sherman Oaks, which was a 20-minute drive, I was looking around in complete awe, seeing things for the very first time, so to speak, in reality, that this world is falling apart, and who are we and what we are. And by the time I got to the bus stop, I got out, I ran to her house, I knocked on the door. I said, can I come in? I came in, I sat on the couch. I said, everything's going to be okay. I don't know why. I just know something happened to me on the bus just now, and I don't know how to explain it. And she looked at me like I was nuts. Well, 2 weeks later, I had this thirst that I went and I rented Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth, that long 9-hour movie. And when it came to the part, my wife was cooking in the kitchen. It came to the part, it says, my sheep know my voice. I turned to her and I yelled across the room. I said, Sherry, that's who I met on the bus. That's who spoke to me on the bus. He wasn't a literal voice, but that's who spoke to me on the bus. He spoke to me. And she was looking at me like I was crazy. But that was the confirmation. And then I went to church 2 weeks later. She went with me. And the pastor just happened to be talking about being born again. And he said, Nicodemus, don't be all crazy about being born again and going back into your mother's womb. And I turned to her and I said, that's what happened to me. I was born again. Whatever born again means, that's what happened to me. And it's that Jesus that spoke to me. So the people at that church, it was a very big church, and a lot of celebrities went there. And they asked me once they found out. I said it in a group, a church group very nonchalantly because I thought that's what happened to everybody that came to Jesus. And they were like, what an amazing story. You've got to tell. So I ended up telling it the week after to 3,000 people, my story. And I'll tell you something, Derek, I've never told my story since because I've kept, and I've told a couple of people, but they laughed at me. So this is why this whole story of this, I mean, I really didn't want to put it out there, but my kids told me, Dad, just how you felt alone and wish somebody would come beside you, there could be somebody out there that can relate to your story. And that's the whole reason why I went public.
Well, there's again, you know, for what little insight we have into it based on what Sharon experienced last fall. And again, a story that she's told publicly before. She doesn't bring it out on a regular basis to get attention, but it was in the context of discussing Josh Peck's documentary on the UFO phenomenon, which is a demonic intervention. It's not extraterrestrials. These are interdimensional entities, and so it fit the conversation, and yet the ridicule that she endured for telling that story is indicative, I think, of what a lot of people go through. So I pray that your story, and again, we just scratched the surface, Michael, so we're going to have you back on the program to talk about this again and go deeper. But this is an aspect of the Christian walk that most of the church today has completely forgotten. As I said, you know, I grew up in a very liturgical denomination where the Holy Spirit was not discussed. Forget about demons. There's a line in the movie The Exorcist where Father Karras, who assists the older Father Marin, who's the exorcist. Father Karras is the Jesuit priest. And he tells the mother of the possessed girl, we stopped believing in demonic possession, when we discovered psychology, the science of psychology. And that is essentially where we in the Christian church are today. I think the church of the first century, the apostles, and the first couple of generations after them would look at us today and say, what have you done with this legacy that you were given? So appreciate your story. The book, actually 2 parts, Devil Take the Hindmost, Part 1 and Part 2, Michael Gagliardi, the author. Is there a website, Michael, where people can follow your work or your music or?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Facebook. I've got, you know, lots of YouTube albums out. I mean, what I do for a living is I'm a flamenco guitar player. So I'm a flamenco and jazz player. Wow. That's what I do for a living. So that's why I got along with L.A. Marzulli, because he's a composer.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I do for a living. And to tell you the truth, I really can't hold a job because I have such severe PTSD symptoms. I go play for 2 hours and the music's therapy. It really is. Yeah. I don't think of anything when I'm playing.
No, I get that. My therapy was barbershop quartet, but
oh yeah. Well, any singing or anything involved in the arts like that, it fires off all 4 lobes of the brain. It's like fireworks. Yeah. You know. So that's what's been the thing that has really kept me together. Well, even though I'm really not together, I mean, I'm saved and I believe in Jesus, you know, with all my heart, but I still have the scars. You know, the PTSD does not go away. You know, it does not go away. My numbing in my face, I live with it on a day-to-day basis. I can't communicate in a job setting, and so it's been very detrimental. Yeah, but the Lord is using it. Praise God, to let others know that this attack by the enemy, these attacks by the enemy, are not just things that happen in stories. This is a real aspect of the spiritual war in which we're all deployed. It's really all about whose children will inherit the earth, the children of Adam and Eve, or the hybrid children created by the Watchers. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. I mean, even Isaiah references it in Isaiah 26. When you understand Isaiah 26, beginning at verse 13 correctly, they are dead, they will not live. They are Rephaim, they will not arise. It's all about who gets resurrected at the end. So, Michael, thank you for sharing your story with us today. And again, we're going to have you back on the program sooner rather than later to continue this conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been an honor. You'll find links in the show notes at VFTB.net or wherever else you're consuming this podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, youtube.com/Gilbert House, I encourage you to subscribe and share that link with your friends. All of our video content is there. You can also find us on our mobile app. That's probably the easiest way to get it, or by adding our channel to Roku or Apple TV. It's free,
And we have links at both VFTB.net or GilbertHouse.org, which is sort of our global hub, GilbertHouse.org/app. That'll get you links to the app stores for iOS, Android, Amazon Kindle Fire tablets, also Roku and Apple TV. All of those right there, free, and that bypasses the gatekeepers of big tech. Because you never know when on YouTube we might say something that will irritate the gatekeepers at Google and find suddenly that they've cut off our channel. That's happened before where things have been yanked. Our Sci Friday episodes where we talked in the early days about the coronavirus got some episodes pulled down for saying things that were absolutely true. Not speculative, not conspiracy theory, but absolutely true, and yet got us yanked. So our app is produced by a company, developed by a Christian company that does not try to censor us. So we encourage you, get our mobile app, add it to Roku, Apple TV, and carry us around in your smartphone or tablet. If you don't have Roku, you can use your tablet and cast the video using Apple's AirPlay or Google's Chromecast to your smart TV. Most modern, really recent smart TVs are compatible with one or the other or both, and you can do it that way, cast the video to your big screen without any wires at all, which is kind of handy. So anyway, you'll find us on social media, Twitter at ViewFromBunker, my personal Twitter account at Derek Gilbert. We're on all the new social media sites, Truth Social, Gab Me, We Get Our Parlor at Derek P. Gilbert. And coming up, we've got a conference in California. We will be in Live Oak, California in mid-September, September 15th through 17th. I'll be there with L.A. Marzulli, Timothy Alberino, and Pastor Dave Bryan of Church of Glad Tidings. That's hosting the conference. Pastor Bryan hosting the conference, and you can find out more at their website, churchofgladtidings.com. If you're in the area, then we hope we see you there. We will be in Israel next year, and as we we will take you to sites that most other tours will not, archaeological sites that are really important in the long supernatural war in which we're all deployed. Mount Hermon, of course, Caesarea Philippi, the Grotto of Pan. We will also go to Gilgal Rephaim, which is not technically a biblical site, but at least we have the archaeological research to show that it was devoted to the cult of the dead. Prehistoric, probably goes back almost 6,000 years, that location, but it connects to the whole greater region of Bashan, which was essentially in the ancient world a giant necropolis. Why is that significant? Well, talk about that in the context of Isaiah 9 and Matthew 4, and why Jesus chose to leave Nazareth and set up at Capernaum. Why did he do that? Why did he get baptized by John where he was baptized? It's not down south by Jericho. I can tell you that right now. It was north of the Sea of Galilee, and there's a specific reason for it. Why did he ask Peter that question at Caesarea Philippi? Why was the transfiguration on Mount Hermon? All of that is significant, and we'll talk about that all through the tour as Sharon and I, along with our good friend Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat, and our colleagues from Skywatch TV, Allie Henson and Donna Howell, will be teaching and preaching all along the way. Encourage you to pray about joining us, and you can find out more information at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel, gilberthouse.org/travel. If you can leave us a review, that would be greatly appreciated, whether it's at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever fine podcasts are sold. And please remember that we've got a Facebook page, View from the Bunker. Give us a thumbs up there and discuss the issues that we raise on the weekly programs. Our announcer for the program is the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries and released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.